The rain came down the way it always did in late October, not gently, not with any of the softness people like to assign to autumn weather. It came down hard and cold and sideways, the kind of rain that found every gap in a coat, every worn thin patch of a shoe sole, every place where warmth had been trying to hold on. Mara found them because she always took the long way back from the kitchens. Not by choice, exactly. The other girls had made the direct route uncomfortable a long time ago. Too many elbows in narrow corridors, too many whispers that stopped just loud enough to still be heard. The long way took her past the back of the Ashwell home for orphaned Omegas, past the loading dock, the rusted fence, to the row of garbage bins that smelled like old cabbage, and something else she had never been able to identify. And it added 7 minutes to every trip, but those 7 minutes were hers. No one else wanted them. She heard the whimpering before she saw anything. She stopped, pulled her coat tighter, told herself it was stray dogs, or cats, or the wind doing something complicated around the corner of the building. She had a talent for talking herself out of things that were going to cost her something. 2 years at Ashwell had developed that talent considerably. Then lightning split the sky and held for one long, illuminating second. 2 small figures were pressed against the base of the bin, shivering so hard she could see it from 10 feet away. They were wolf-shaped in the way that very young shifter cubs are wolf-shaped. Roughly, not quite, as if the form hasn't fully committed yet. Small enough to fit in her arms. Their fur, what little she could see of it in the strobing light, was soaked flat. Their eyes, when they found her, were gold. Not yellow. Gold. The particular, ancient, burning gold that every wolf-shifter child learned to recognize before they learned to read. Alpha cubs. Mara's heart performed a complicated maneuver in her chest. Equal parts recognition and terror because she understood immediately, completely, and without any possibility of talking herself out of it, exactly what she was looking at. Alpha cubs. Alone. In the rain behind a building full of Omegas, in a territory whose pack dynamics she had never been able to fully map, stuck in a city where the rules around wolf hierarchy were enforced with the kind of consistency that made the blood run cold. She knew what she was supposed to do. Every Omega in the system knew. You didn't touch unmated alpha cubs. You didn't interact with pack young without explicit permission. You reported sightings to the house matron, who reported them to the territory wardens, who handled it through proper channels that had nothing to do with you, and would go significantly better for everyone if you removed yourself from the situation entirely. She had her next 7 steps planned before the second cub lifted its head. It looked at her with those gold eyes. Tired eyes, she realized, in a face too young for exhaustion, and made a sound that was not quite a whimper, and not quite a word, and was, somehow, both of those things at once. A sound that said, I have been trying to be brave about this for longer than I had the resources for. Mara knew that sound. She had made it herself, in the dark of her narrow bed, more times than she could count. She reached into her coat pocket and took out the bread roll she had been saving since breakfast. She had been hungry since lunch. She had been planning to eat it at precisely the moment tonight when the hunger became difficult enough to keep her awake. She had timed it carefully, the way you learn to time things when there is never quite enough of anything. She broke it in half. She held both halves out, one toward each cub, and crouched down to their level so she was not looming, because she had read somewhere that you shouldn't loom over frightened animals, and it seemed like advice that probably applied here too. They stared at the bread for 2 full seconds, long enough that she started to wonder if she had misread the situation entirely. And then both of them moved at once, covering the distance between them in a scramble of uncoordinated paws, and the bread was gone before she had fully registered that they had taken it. They looked up at her. That was the moment. She recognized it even as it was happening. The moment that was going to cost her something significant, and that she was going to allow anyway, because some things are stronger than self-preservation, and hunger in someone else's eyes, when you have known it in your own, is one of them. That's all I have, she said softly. I'm sorry. She went back inside. She lay in her narrow bed. She listened to the rain. In the morning, she divided her breakfast into thirds. For 6 days, Hamara went hungry. Not dramatically. Not in a way she let anyone see. She was practiced at the kind of endurance that doesn't call attention to itself. She ate enough to remain functional. She gave the rest to the 2 small wolves who were still crouched behind the bins when she arrived each night, still alive, still watching for her with those gold eyes that had started to carry something new in them alongside the exhaustion. Something that looked, increasingly, like trust. They were getting stronger. She could see it in the way they moved, less trembling, more purposeful. The younger one, the smaller one with the slightly crooked left ear, had started greeting her by attempting to climb her coat. The older one was more reserved, but it pressed its nose to her palm every night before eating. A gesture she didn't know the formal name for, but understood instinctively as something deliberate and important. She named them privately in her own head, because she was not going to say the names out loud. That would make it real in a different way, and she was already aware that she was operating well past the boundary of things she was supposed to be doing. Pip and Ash. Pip for the way the smaller one moved, quick and bright and slightly chaotic. Ash for the older one's fur color in the rain, dark silver, the color of early morning. She did not think about what would happen when they were found. She thought about it constantly. On the morning of the 7th day, she took the long way past the bins and found them gone. No fur, no small warm bodies, no gold eyes watching for her from the shadows. Just the rain and the bins, yes, and the empty space where they had been. Mara stood there for longer than she should have. She was going to be late to morning inspection. She was going to draw attention, standing here in the rain, staring at nothing, and attention at Ashwell was almost never a good thing. She made herself walk inside. She sat through inspection, through breakfast, a full portion, which she ate mechanically and without pleasure, through the morning chores rotation. She carried the hollow feeling in her chest, the way she was accustomed to carrying things she couldn't put down and couldn't talk about. She told herself they were safe. She told herself this was the correct outcome. She told herself the ache would pass. It didn't pass. What she didn't know, what she had no way of knowing, as behind the walls of Ashwell, with its narrow beds and its never quite enough of everything, was what had been set in motion the moment she crouched down in the rain and held out a piece of bread with both hands. What she didn't know was that the 2 cubs she had named Pip and Ash were the youngest children of the Alpha King, not a regional alpha, not a district overseer. The Alpha King, the single authority above whom there was no appeal, the man whose word structured the entire territory's hierarchy from its highest point to its lowest. The man who had been searching for his missing cubs for 6 days with a focused, terrifying, systematic thoroughness that had involved every resource available to the most powerful pack on the continent. What she didn't know was that his cubs had been taken, not lost, not wandered off, but deliberately separated from their escort by a faction within the pack's own inner circle. People who understood that the Alpha King's greatest vulnerability was not any external threat, but the 2 small wolves he loved without strategy or calculation, openly and completely, in the way that powerful people sometimes love their children, without the armor they wear for everything else. What she didn't know was that when they were found, when they were brought home to the great hall of the pack's central house, cold and exhausted, and smelling of rain and cabbage, and something warm and safe that no one could immediately identify, the first thing the older cub did was refuse food. And the second thing it did was make a sound that its father had never heard from it before, low and insistent, a direction. There. Go back. There. The Alpha King crouched down to his son's level. He pressed his forehead to the small wolf's forehead. He listened. And then he stood up, and the expression on his face made every person in the room take a step back without fully understanding why. Find out everything, he said quietly, about the Ashwell home for orphaned Omegas. The matron called it a random inspection. She announced it at breakfast on a Tuesday, A spot check from the Territory Welfare Office, she said. Very routine, nothing to worry about. Everyone was to be on their best behavior and remember that Ashwell's reputation reflected on all of them. Mara noted that the matron's hands were shaking when she made the announcement. She noted that the inspection vehicles that pulled up to the front gate were not the faded blue of the welfare office, but a deep, an unremarkable black. She noted that the men and women who climbed out of them moved with the particular economy of people who did not waste effort. She noted that there were too many of them for a routine welfare check, and that they spread through the building with a systematic thoroughness that was not how anyone conducted a routine welfare check. She was in the laundry room when the matron found her. "You." The matron's voice was strange, tight, like something held under pressure. "Come with me." Mara's first thought was that she had been found out about the food. Her second thought, following immediately, was that this seemed like a disproportionate response to a week of shared dinner rolls. The matron walked too fast. Mara followed through corridors she knew by heart, past the bulletin boards with their peeling edges, past the matron's office where she had stood more than once being told to manage her expectations, past the front reception area where the good furniture lived, the furniture they only used when external people were present. They stopped at the door of the formal meeting room. The matron opened it without knocking. The room held 3 people Mara didn't recognize, and one very large wolf, sitting in his human form in a chair that looked slightly too small for the purpose, with his forearms resting on the table and his attention moving to Mara the moment she appeared in the doorway. She had thought, on the rare occasions she had let herself think about the Alpha King at all, that he would look the way authority figures looked. Assembled, deliberate, built for being looked at. He didn't look like that. He looked like a man who had not slept in 6 days and had made his peace with that. He looked like a man who was accustomed to controlling a great deal and had recently been reminded, forcibly, that some things are outside the boundaries of control. His hair was dark, longer than was formal, as if cutting it had not seemed important recently. His eyes, when they found her face, were gold. The same gold. Mara went very still. "Sit down," he said. Not a command, or rather, it was a command, but not a cold one. The voice of someone accustomed to being obeyed, who was, in this specific moment, actively trying to be careful. She sat. He looked at her for a long moment without speaking. She had the distinct impression she was being assessed in a way that went considerably deeper than surface, and that whatever was being looked for was not what most people looked for when they looked at her. "My children came home smelling of rain," he said, "and bread, and something they keep telling me is safe." He paused. "They told me the direction. They told me the smell. They have not eaten properly since we brought them home, because they are looking for something they left behind." His voice remained even. She had the sense it cost him something to keep it that way. "I would like to understand what happened behind this building." Mara looked at her hands on the table. They were rough, a little red from the laundry work. She thought about the bread roll. She thought about the gold eyes in the rain. "They were hungry," she said. "Yes. I had food." She looked up. "Not much, but I had some." "You gave it to them." Not a question. "For 6 days." She held his gaze. She was not sure where the steadiness was coming from. Possibly from having nothing left to lose. "I know I wasn't supposed to. I know the rules around Alpha Young and Omega Contact and all of it. I know." She paused. "But they were hungry and cold, and they were trying very hard to be brave about a situation that was too big for them, and I—" She stopped. "You recognized it," he said quietly. She blinked. The trying to be brave about something too large. His voice had changed. Still even, but something underneath it now. Something that had been held carefully and was only fractionally, carefully being let out. "You recognized it because you have done it yourself." The room was very quiet. Mara didn't answer because he hadn't asked a question, and because her throat had done something complicated that she needed a moment to resolve. "My children were taken," he said. "Not lost. Taken. by people within my own inner circle who calculated that this was the most effective way to destabilize my authority. His jaw tightened slightly. They were left in this district deliberately, in this weather, at this time of year. A pause. The people who did this understood that if the cubs were not found quickly, the cold would do what they could not do directly. Mara felt the cold of it settle through her. They were found, he said, because you fed them, because you kept them strong enough to be found. He looked at her directly. I owe you a debt that is not payable in routine terms. So I'm going to ask you something instead. He reached into the folder in front of him and slid a single sheet of paper across the table. She looked at it, read it twice, looked up. This isn't, she started. A formal petition for ward status under pack protection, he said, with full legal standing, housing, education, provision, your own counsel to review the terms. He paused. I am aware that a piece of paper means very little when the piece of paper is coming from someone with significantly more power than you. I am aware that the correct response to a power differential is caution. His eyes were direct and steady, and said nothing she could not read. I am also aware that my children have not eaten since they came home, and that they spent this morning standing at the door of the great hall, making sounds that mean go back and get her. My son pressed his nose to the hand of every pack member he encountered today, looking for a particular smell. My daughter climbed to the highest point of the great hall, and sat there refusing to come down. Something moved through his expression, something he allowed, briefly, to be visible. They are not confused about what they want. They have not been confused since the moment they found you. Mara looked at the paper. She thought about the narrow bed, the 7-minute detour, the bread roll broken into halves in the rain. She thought about what it cost to trust something when the evidence of your entire life was telling you that trust was a resource that ran out. The people who took them, she said carefully, the ones inside your circle. He met her eyes. Being handled, he said. Can you tell me? No. Then, not yet, when it is resolved. You will know everything. A beat. I do not intend to ask you to enter a situation whose full shape you cannot see. That is not how this begins. She noticed the word. Begins. She looked back at the paper. There's something I need to tell you first, she said. He waited. I named them. She felt the color rise in her face, a small, involuntary thing she couldn't stop. In my head, the cubs. I named them Pip and Ash. I know they have actual names. I know it wasn't my place. She stopped. I needed to call them something, in my own head, so they were someone. The room was very quiet. Then the Alpha King did something she had not expected. He leaned back slightly, and the expression that crossed his face was not offense or amusement, or any of the things she had been bracing for. It was something much simpler and much harder to look at directly. Their names, he said, are Kale and Sora. She nodded. Sora has a slightly crooked left ear, he said, from birth. She has never let it bother her. She tends to climb things and refuse to come down when she wants attention. A pause, and something in his voice that was very carefully not breaking. Kale presses his nose to the hands of people he is deciding to trust. It is how he says, I choose you. He has done it since he was old enough to walk. Mara pressed her lips together. Pip, she said quietly, suits Sora. The Alpha King looked at her for a long moment. Yes, he said. It does. She didn't say yes that day, so she asked for 3 days to consider, which he granted without pressure, and with an immediacy that told her he had anticipated the request, and respected it. She was given a proper room in the interim, not at Ashwell, which she did not return to after that morning, but in a quiet house at the edge of the pack's central district, where she was told she could come and go as she pleased, and that no one would require anything of her until she was ready. She spent a day walking. She spent a day sitting by a window, watching the city move. She spent the 3rd day at a table with the independent counsel she had been provided, going through the ward agreement line by line, asking questions, pushing back on 3 specific clauses, and receiving revisions within 2 hours that addressed each of her concerns. On the morning of the 4th day, Shukshi signed it. She was taken to the Great Hall. She had been trying, privately, not to think too much about this moment, not to expect anything specific, not to build it into something in her imagination that the reality couldn't support. The door opened. Something small and very fast hit her at approximately knee height. Then, slightly higher, from the other side, a second impact, as Kale, Ash, her brain supplied helplessly, pressed his nose to her palm with the focused, serious deliberateness of a cub who had been waiting 4 days to do exactly this, and was not going to rush it now. Mara sat down on the floor of the Great Hall because her knees had made a unilateral decision, and the 2 cubs arranged themselves around her, with the proprietary completeness of creatures who had resolved this question entirely in their own minds, and were simply waiting for the paperwork to catch up. She looked up. The Alpha King was standing a few feet away, watching this with an expression she had not seen on his face before. Something unguarded, something that had been under the controlled surface all along, and was only now, in this specific moment, in the presence of his children finally settled, allowing itself to be seen. Around the edges of the Great Hall, pack members were filing in, quietly, without announcement. Not crowding, not rushing, just arriving the way people arrive when something important is happening, and they want to be present for it, without overwhelming it. An older woman sat beside Mara on the floor without ceremony and introduced herself as the cub's aunt. A man with gray in his beard crouched down and said he was the pack historian, and that he would very much like to hear, when she was ready, how she had managed to keep 2 alpha cubs hidden for 6 nights in an Omega house without anyone noticing, because the logistics alone were impressive. Sora, Pip, climbed Mara's shoulder and surveyed the room with the expression of someone who has arranged things to their satisfaction. Mara looked at the Alpha King. He crossed the distance between them and crouched down to her level, the way she had crouched down in the rain, so that he was not looming, and she had the sense that this was deliberate and considered, and that he had thought about it. "I am going to tell you something," he said quietly, "that I have told very few people. Not because it is a secret, but because it has not been relevant until now." She waited. "I have run this pack alone for 11 years, he said, "since my mate died. I have been—" He paused, and the pause was honest rather than performative, the pause of someone finding the right word rather than the comfortable one. Sufficient. For what was required. A good alpha. Possibly a fair one. His eyes, those burning gold eyes that his cubs had inherited, were steady on hers. "I have not been warm. There has not been room for it, I thought. Or perhaps I did not want to find out what happened if I let warmth back in and it cost me something again." Mara said nothing. Kale pressed closer against her side. "My children," the Alpha King said, "came home from 6 days in the cold and the rain, and they were not broken. They were—" His voice changed fractionally, in a way that she thought he probably never let it change in rooms with more people watching. "They were warm. They were whole. They pressed their faces into my hands, and they smelled like someone had taken care of them." He looked at her directly. "You did that. With nothing. With half a bread roll and 7 minutes that nobody else wanted." "It wasn't—" she started. "I know," he said. "I know it wasn't heroism. I know it was just what you did. I know you would say anyone would have done it." Something in his expression said he was not going to argue that point right now. "But anyone didn't. You did." Sora had fallen asleep on Mara's shoulder. The slight, a warm weight of her was so particular and specific that Mara felt it would leave an imprint. "I don't know how to do this," Mara said honestly. "Any of this. I don't know pack customs properly. I don't know the hierarchy. I don't know how to be whatever this is." "No one does," he said, "at the beginning. You'll have to—" She stopped. "You'll have to be patient with me." "Yes." He said it simply, without performance. "I will." Around them, the hall continued its quiet filling. Someone brought tea. The pack historian had found a piece of paper and appeared to be writing something down. Cale had fallen asleep against Mara's other side, a small, snoring weight of total and absolute trust. The Alpha King did not stand up. He stayed at her level in the unhurried way of someone who had nowhere more important to be, and for the first time in 11 years he didn't look like a man bracing against something. He looked like a man who had just set something heavy down and was beginning, cautiously, to straighten. "The people who took them," Mara said after a while. "Lord Davin and 2 members of the Inner Council," he said. "Detained. Being processed through the formal tribunal." A pause. "It will be public, fully. The pack will know what was done." "And they thought?" She frowned. "They thought taking the cubs would destabilize you." "Yes." "They miscalculated. Considerably." His eyes moved to his sleeping children, and the expression on his face was the kind that has no armor in it at all. "They forgot that the things which break us and the things which build us are sometimes the same thing." He looked back at her. "They forgot that the worst thing they could do for their own cause was to leave my children in the rain near an Omega girl who didn't know the rules about her own kindness." Mara looked at the 2 small sleeping wolves. She thought about the long way around, the 7 minutes, the bread roll. She thought about the hollow ache in her chest that had been there for so long she had stopped noticing it as a wound and started treating it as a feature. It was quiet now. She checked it carefully. Still there, but changed. Something had moved into the space beside it, not filling it exactly. More like sitting with it, keeping it company. "I have a question," she said. "Ask it. What did they mean by safe?" She looked at him. "You said they came home smelling of something they kept calling safe. I want to know if that's a wolf thing, a formal thing, or if it means," he said carefully, "that they identified you as a safe person, before you had done anything except crouch down at their level in the rain." His voice was very even. "It is not a formal designation. It is not something that can be assigned. It is something they know, in the way that young wolves know things, without being taught, without being told." He paused. "They have called 3 people safe in their lives. Their mother, myself, and you." The hall was very quiet. "Oh," Mara said. "Yes," he said. Outside the window the rain had stopped. The particular kind of stillness that follows a long rain had settled over the city, clean, rinsed, temporary, the kind that makes you think the world might be different now than it was before. Sora snored softly on her shoulder. Cale's small nose twitched against her side. The Alpha King was watching her with the patient, careful attention of a man who has been waiting, though he didn't know it yet, though the word wasn't available to him yet in this early tentative moment, for the particular kind of warmth that doesn't announce itself. The kind that simply appears one day, in the rain, with both hands out and half a bread roll to offer, and changes the temperature of everything. "Welcome home," the pack historian said, looking up from his notes, as if this settled the matter entirely. Mara looked around the hall. At the tea, at the ant on the floor beside her, at the man with the gray beard and his piece of paper, at the 2 sleeping cubs who had decided, in the uncomplicated way of creatures who know what they know, that she was theirs. At the Alpha King, who was not yet smiling, but whose face had lost its bracing quality entirely, who looked, for the first time in what she suspected was a very long time, like someone who was exactly where he intended to be. "I don't know your name," she realized. "Your actual name, not your title." He blinked. A small human thing, almost startled. "Rail," he said. "Rail," she repeated. He looked at her the way you look at something you have been trying to protect for so long that, finding it already safe, already held, already home, feels less like relief and more like the sudden absence of a weight you had forgotten you were carrying. "You should drink your tea," he said, "before it gets cold." She reached for the cup. Outside the clouds were moving. The light that came through the tall windows of the great hall, was the particular golden color of late afternoon after rain. The color that doesn't last, that exists only in the narrow window between one thing ending and something else not yet begun. It was, Mara thought, exactly enough to see by.